Most people think canned tuna is one of the safest foods they can buy. It is affordable. It is packed with protein. Doctors often recommend it. Millions of Americans keep a few cans sitting in the pantry without ever wondering what is actually inside. But what if the fish on the label is not always the fish in the can? One of the biggest scandals in the canned tuna industry did not begin with mercury. It did not begin with food safety. It started with something almost nobody expected: a federal criminal investigation. The chief executive officer of Bumblebee Foods was indicted after prosecutors accused him of helping coordinate canned tuna prices across the United States. Two other executives had already admitted their involvement, and the company eventually agreed to pay millions of dollars in criminal penalties. For most people, that story came and went without changing a single shopping habit. Then another investigation raised an even more disturbing question. Independent researchers purchased canned tuna from grocery stores across America and used DNA testing to identify exactly what species were inside the cans. Some of the findings suggested that certain products did not always contain the species consumers believed they were buying. That changes everything. Because now the question is no longer whether canned tuna is healthy. The question becomes whether the label always tells the whole story. Even more surprising, many of the brands that have faced investigations are household names. These are companies that families have trusted for decades. Brands that have earned billions of dollars by building an image of quality, consistency, and reliability. Today, Golden Menu is taking a closer look at 7 of the biggest canned tuna brands sold across America. We are going to examine the investigations, the controversies, the sourcing concerns, and the independent testing that every shopper deserves to know before buying another can. Then, at the end of this video, we will show you 2 brands that stand out for transparency and have built a much stronger reputation for quality. Before we begin, tell us something in the comments. Which canned tuna brand is sitting in your pantry right now? There is a good chance it appears somewhere on this list. And if there is another food brand you have always wanted us to investigate, subscribe to Golden Menu and leave its name below. Many of our future investigations come directly from suggestions in the comments. Now let us begin with one of the most recognizable names in the history of canned tuna. StarKist. For more than 60 years, Charlie the Tuna has been one of the most recognizable mascots in American advertising. The joke was simple. Charlie desperately wanted StarKist to choose him because he believed he had great taste. Generation after generation grew up watching those commercials. Parents trusted the brand. Their children trusted it. And today, many of those same families are still reaching for the familiar blue can without giving it a second thought. That is exactly what makes this story so surprising, because behind one of the most trusted names in canned seafood sits one of the biggest criminal cases the industry has ever seen. According to the United States Department of Justice, StarKist, Bumblebee Foods, and Chicken of the Sea spent years coordinating canned tuna prices instead of competing fairly. Rather than allowing the market to determine prices naturally, prosecutors allege that the companies worked together to control what consumers ultimately paid at grocery stores across America. After a lengthy federal investigation, StarKist pleaded guilty in 2019 to criminal price-fixing charges. The company agreed to pay $100 million in criminal fines. Think about that number for a moment. $100 million of that size unless investigators uncover something extremely serious. For many shoppers, that conviction alone is enough to start asking difficult questions. But pricing was only the beginning. Independent researchers have also examined canned tuna using DNA sequencing to determine whether the fish inside matched what was printed on the label. Some testing raised concerns about species substitution. In several samples, products labeled as albacore appeared to contain skipjack instead. Other samples raised additional questions because the genetic results did not clearly match the species consumers expected to find. DNA does not rely on marketing. It does not recognize brand loyalty. It simply identifies the species that is actually present. When those results raise questions, consumers deserve honest answers. There is another concern that becomes especially important for seniors, pregnant women, and families with young children. Mercury. Independent laboratory testing has reported noticeable differences in mercury levels across certain StarKist product lines. Mercury does not leave the body overnight. It can accumulate gradually through repeated exposure over many years. That is why health experts often recommend limiting high mercury fish for pregnant women and young children, whose developing nervous systems are especially vulnerable. Ironically, those same families are often encouraged to buy canned tuna because it is viewed as an affordable source of lean protein. Now take a closer look the next time you open a can. Press the tuna gently with a fork. Notice whether every piece breaks apart the same way. A consistent texture is generally what consumers expect from a single verified species. When firmness, color, and texture vary noticeably throughout one can, it naturally raises more questions about consistency. It does not prove anything by itself, but it certainly reminds us why transparency matters. Before we move on, let us hear from you. Have you eaten StarKist within the past month? If you have, tell us which variety you usually buy in the comments. And if you appreciate investigations like this that look beyond the marketing and into the facts, subscribe to Golden Menu because we have many more food brands to uncover. The next company has been a trusted name in American kitchens for more than a century. Its famous mermaid became a symbol of quality. But the investigations surrounding the company tell a much more complicated story. Chicken of the Sea has been part of American grocery stores since 1914. For many families, it is more than just another canned tuna brand. It is something they grew up with. The familiar mermaid on the label has survived world wars, economic downturns, changing food trends, and more than a century of competition. That kind of history creates trust. When people see a brand that has been around for generations, they naturally assume it has earned its reputation. But reputation and reality are not always the same thing. Today, Chicken of the Sea is owned by Thai Union, one of the largest seafood companies in the world. The corporation controls a significant share of the global canned seafood market, supplying products to millions of consumers across dozens of countries. Managing a supply chain that large is incredibly complicated, and over the years it has also brought intense scrutiny. One of the most well-known investigations came from the Associated Press. Journalists uncovered evidence suggesting that parts of the Thai seafood industry were linked to forced labor. According to the investigation, some workers had been trafficked onto fishing vessels, trapped at sea for extended periods, denied fair wages, and given little opportunity to leave. Seafood caught under those conditions eventually entered international supply chains, including products sold in American worldwide attention, and ultimately earned one of journalism's highest honors. Following the public backlash, Thai Union announced a series of reforms. The company joined sustainability initiatives, strengthened supplier oversight, and pledged to improve working conditions throughout its supply chain. Those commitments were certainly encouraging. But changing a global supply chain is far more difficult than announcing new policies. Independent audits conducted after those promises continued to identify challenges involving sourcing transparency and supply chain oversight. That highlights one of the biggest problems facing the canned tuna industry today. When seafood passes through hundreds of fishing vessels, multiple processing facilities, numerous suppliers, and several countries before reaching the grocery shelf, verifying every single step becomes incredibly difficult. The longer the supply chain becomes, the harder it is for consumers to know exactly where their food came from. That is one reason species substitution remains a concern throughout the industry. It is not necessarily because every company intends to mislead consumers. Sometimes the complexity of the supply chain itself creates opportunities for mistakes that become difficult to detect later. That is exactly why independent verification matters. Consumers should not have to rely entirely on information provided by the companies selling the product. There should be independent systems confirming that the fish inside the can matches what appears on the label. The next time you open a can of Chicken of the Sea, pay attention before you even drain the liquid. Look at its appearance. Notice whether it looks consistent from one purchase to the next. Consistency is one of the simplest signs consumers can observe, even though it can never replace proper laboratory testing. Ultimately, Transparency is what builds confidence, not clever advertising, not attractive packaging, and not a smiling mermaid. Before we continue, let us hear from you. Do you usually buy Chicken of the Sea or Starkist? Tell us which one you trust more in the comments. If there is another seafood brand you have always wondered about, leave its name below because Golden Menu may feature it in a future investigation. Next, we come to the company that completed what many people now call the canned tuna criminal triangle. Unlike the previous brands, this story ended with the chief executive officer standing before a federal jury, and the outcome changed the company's history forever. Bumblebee Foods became the third major company caught in the federal investigation. If Starkist admitted its role and Chicken of the Sea cooperated with investigators, Bumblebee became the face of the scandal for an entirely different reason. Its chief executive officer, Christopher Leshevsky, chose to fight the charges in court. A federal jury ultimately found him guilty. In 2019, he was sentenced to 40 months in federal prison for his role in the canned tuna price-fixing conspiracy. Think about what that means. The leader of one of the most recognizable canned tuna companies in America was not simply accused, he was convicted. That alone should make every consumer stop and ask one important question. If a company was willing to break the law to increase profits, what else should consumers be paying closer attention to? The criminal case marked a turning point for Bumblebee Foods. That same year, the company filed for bankruptcy. New owners stepped in. The business was restructured. The packaging became more modern. The messaging shifted towards sustainability, transparency, and rebuilding consumer trust. On the surface, it looked like a fresh start, but changing ownership is much easier than changing an entire supply chain. The real question is not whether the company can now demonstrate greater transparency than it did before. Can consumers clearly identify where the fish came from? Can they trace it back to a named fishery? Can they easily verify the species through independent testing? Those are the questions that truly matter. Critics argue that many of those answers remain difficult to find on standard Bumblebee products. While the company has emphasized improvements since its restructuring, many consumers still have limited visibility into the sourcing information behind the fish inside the can. That lack of transparency continues to concern shoppers who want to know exactly what they are buying. Independent testing conducted after the restructuring has also continued to raise questions about consistency across certain product lines, including differences involving mercury levels and species verification. Whether those concerns affect every product is impossible to say, but they reinforce an important point. Trust should never depend solely on marketing. It should be supported by clear evidence that consumers can independently verify. The next time you open a can of Bumblebee Solid White Albacore, pay close attention to the texture. Fish from a single verified species generally shows a fairly consistent grain and muscle structure. When color, firmness, and texture vary significantly within the same can, many consumers naturally begin asking more questions about sourcing and consistency. Again, appearance alone cannot prove anything. Only proper laboratory testing can do that. But informed consumers should never hesitate to ask where their food comes from. That is exactly how better standards begin. Before we move on, let us ask you something. Did you know that the former chief executive officer of Bumblebee Foods actually served time in federal prison? If this is the first time you have heard about that case, let us know in the comments. And if you appreciate investigations that go beyond headlines and examine what companies would rather leave forgotten, subscribe to Golden Menu. We still have 4 more brands to examine. The next one is different. It does not belong to a seafood company at all. Instead, it belongs to the largest retailer on Earth. And that creates an entirely different set of questions. Target has spent decades building one of the strongest retail brands in America. Walk into almost any Target store and you immediately notice the difference. The aisles look cleaner. The packaging feels more modern. Everything is carefully designed to create the impression of higher quality. That same image extends to Target's private label products. One of them is Market Pantry. Many shoppers automatically assume that because Market Pantry is sold by Target, it must be held to a higher standard than other store brands. But branding and sourcing are two very different things. Just like Walmart, Target does not own commercial fishing fleets. It does not process tuna. It does not oversee every step between the ocean and the grocery shelf. Instead, Target contracts manufacturers to produce canned tuna under the Market Pantry label. Those manufacturers can change over time as contracts are renewed or awarded to different suppliers. The packaging remains familiar. The company behind the product may not. That is where transparency becomes important. When consumers pick up a can of Market Pantry tuna, very little information is available about the actual fishery that supplied the fish. Most labels provide only the minimum information required under current regulations. You rarely see the name of a specific fishery. You rarely see independent species verification. And you rarely see publicly available testing that allows consumers to evaluate exactly what they are purchasing. For many shoppers, the clean design creates an expectation very little about how the product was actually sourced. One of the biggest criticisms of private label seafood is that consumers often pay more for the shopping experience without necessarily receiving more transparency about the product itself. That is an important distinction. Paying a higher price should ideally provide greater accountability, more detailed sourcing, better traceability, stronger independent verification. Without those things, consumers are left relying largely on trust, and trust works best when it can be verified. Independent research examining private label canned tuna has repeatedly found that anonymous supply chains make species verification much more difficult. When multiple suppliers, processors, and distributors are involved, each additional step creates another opportunity for mistakes or inconsistencies. Again, this does not automatically mean every can is mislabeled. It simply reinforces why clear documentation matters. The next time you open a can of Market Pantry tuna, look beyond the front label. Turn the can over. Read every detail you can find about where the fish came from. You may discover there is much less information available than you expected. That alone should encourage every shopper to ask more questions before making a purchase. Before we reveal the next brand, let us hear from you. Which store brand do you trust more? Great Value from Walmart or Market Pantry from Target? Leave your answer in the comments. We are genuinely curious to see which retailer earns more confidence from Golden Menu viewers. And if you are finding this investigation useful so far, subscribe to Golden Menu. We still have 2 more brands to examine before revealing the 2 brands that impressed us the most. The next company takes a completely different approach. It charges a premium price. It presents itself as a refined European product. And many shoppers believe that premium image automatically guarantees premium quality. But is that really the case? The next brand has built its reputation on something completely different. It does not compete by being the cheapest. It competes by looking premium. Genova. Just hearing the name creates a certain impression. Many shoppers picture a small Italian fishing village, family-owned traditions, carefully selected tuna packed in rich olive oil using recipes that have been passed down for generations. Everything about the branding encourages that image. The elegant packaging, the Italian name, the premium price. Even the words, packed in olive oil, suggest a product that sits well above ordinary canned tuna. But branding can tell one story, while the supply chain tells another. Genova is owned by Bolton Food, a large international seafood company with global sourcing and processing operations. Although the company has Italian roots, that does not necessarily mean every fish inside every can was caught in Italian waters or processed in Italy. Like many multinational seafood companies, Genova sources tuna through an international network that spans multiple regions around the world. That creates many of the same transparency challenges we have already seen throughout this investigation. The premium image leads many consumers to expect a higher level of sourcing accountability. Named fisheries, clear traceability, independent verification, detailed information about exactly where the fish came from. Yet much of that information remains difficult for the average shopper to verify. Independent researchers have also raised questions about species consistency within premium canned tuna products across the broader industry. When consumers pay significantly more for a premium label, they naturally expect that additional cost to support stronger quality control and greater transparency. That expectation is understandable, but it should never be based on often goes unnoticed. The olive oil. Many shoppers focus entirely on the tuna itself, while forgetting that the oil is also part of the product. Olive oil is one of the most commonly adulterated food products in the world. Over the years, independent investigations have repeatedly found products labeled as olive oil that contain blends of less expensive vegetable oils. That does not mean every premium tuna product has this problem, but it does remind us that every ingredient deserves the same level of scrutiny. The next time you open a can of Genova packed in olive oil, pour a small amount of the oil into a clear glass before discarding it. Look at the color. Look at the consistency. Extra virgin olive oil typically has a richer golden green appearance than heavily refined oils. While appearance alone cannot confirm authenticity, it is another reminder to pay attention to every part of the product, not just the fish. When consumers pay a premium price, they deserve premium transparency, not simply premium branding. Before we continue, let us ask you something. Would you pay extra simply because a product looks more premium? Or do you need clear evidence that it actually is? Tell us your answer in the comments. If there is another premium food brand you have always been curious about, let Golden Menu know below. There is a good chance we will investigate it in a future video. Now we have reached the final brand on our caution list. Ironically, this is also the brand that many health-conscious shoppers trust the most. And that is exactly why its story may surprise you. Safe Catch Elite is probably the most unexpected brand on this list. Unlike many other canned tuna companies, Safe Catch built its entire reputation around one promise: mercury testing. The company does not simply claim to test random batches. It promotes the idea that every single fish is individually tested for mercury before it is packed into a can. That promise immediately attracted a very specific group of consumers: pregnant women, cancer patients, families with young children, health-conscious shoppers who wanted the safest canned tuna they could find. To be fair, that commitment has helped Safe Catch earn a strong reputation. Among canned tuna brands, its mercury testing program is widely recognized as one of the strongest in the industry. That part of the company's message is well documented. However, focusing on one strength can sometimes cause consumers to overlook everything else. Many people see the mercury claim on the front of the can and never bother reading the nutrition label on the back. That is where some nutrition experts believe consumers should pay closer attention. Certain Safe Catch products contain noticeably higher sodium levels than many shoppers expect from a brand positioned as a premium health choice. For the average healthy adult, that may not seem like a major issue. But for people managing high blood pressure, heart disease, kidney disease, or fluid retention, sodium becomes much more important. Ironically, many of those consumers are exactly the people Safe Catch hopes to reach. Pregnant women often monitor sodium intake throughout pregnancy. Cancer patients may also need to limit sodium depending on their treatment plan and overall health. In those situations, looking only at the mercury claim can create an incomplete picture of the product. Mercury is only one part of nutrition. Sodium matters too. So do calories, protein, ingredients, and the overall balance of the diet. Health is never determined by a single number printed on the front of a package. That is why every nutrition label deserves a complete reading before a product becomes part of your regular routine. Safe Catch has earned praise for its mercury testing, but every consumer should evaluate the entire nutrition panel rather than focusing on Safe Catch Elite. Turn it over before placing it in your cart. Read the serving size. Check the sodium. Compare it with other brands sitting beside it. You may discover differences that are easy to miss when all the attention is focused on mercury. Before we reveal the two brands that stood out during this investigation, we have one question for you. When you shop for canned tuna, what matters most? Low mercury? Low sodium? Sustainability? Price? Or simply the best overall quality? Leave your answer in the comments because we read every one of them. And if you have learned something new today, subscribe to Golden Menu. Our goal is not to tell you what to buy. It is to give you the information you need to make better decisions for yourself and your family. Now it is time for the good news. After examining all 7 brands, 2 companies consistently stood out for doing far more than simply making promises. They backed those promises with transparency, traceability, and independent verification. Let us start with the first one. Our first recommendation is Wild Planet. Unlike many of the brands we have discussed today, Wild Planet built its reputation by focusing on one simple idea: let consumers know exactly where their fish comes from. From the very beginning, the company positioned itself as an alternative to the practices that have caused so much concern throughout the canned tuna industry. Instead of relying on vague sourcing information, Wild Planet places a strong emphasis on traceability. The company states that its tuna is pole and line caught. That may sound like a small detail, but in the fishing industry, it makes a significant difference. Pole and line fishing targets one fish at a time rather than sweeping large areas of the ocean with massive nets. This approach greatly reduces unintended catch and generally provides much better control over what species are actually brought aboard. That level of selectivity is one reason many marine conservation groups view the method more favorably. Wild Planet also provides far more sourcing information than many competitors. Consumers can learn more about where the fish was harvested, how it was caught, and what standards were followed before it reached the can. Transparency like that gives shoppers something far more valuable than advertising. It gives them information they can actually verify. Another feature that has helped the brand earn trust is its relatively simple ingredient list. Many varieties contain little more than albacore tuna and sea salt. There are no unnecessary fillers, no added broth designed to increase the weight of the can, and no long ingredient panel that leaves consumers wondering what they are actually eating. Independent testing has also supported the company's efforts to verify species identity and monitor mercury levels. No food company is perfect, but when a brand voluntarily provides more documentation, more testing, and more traceability than the legal minimum requires, it gives consumers greater confidence in what they are buying. The difference becomes obvious the moment you open the can. The texture is generally consistent. The muscle fibers remain intact. The appearance is uniform from one piece to the next. That consistency is exactly what many consumers expect when purchasing a premium canned tuna product. Of course, Wild Planet usually costs more than many of the brands we discussed earlier. But that higher price reflects more than just packaging. It supports selective fishing methods, stronger traceability, independent verification, and a supply chain designed around transparency, rather than simply producing the lowest possible cost. Sometimes paying a little more buys something far more valuable than convenience. It buys confidence. Before we reveal our final recommendation, let us know if you have ever tried transparency. Or do you believe every canned tuna should already meet those standards, regardless of price? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you are enjoying investigations like this, subscribe to Golden Menu because we have many more food brands waiting to be examined. Now let us finish with the final recommendation. Unlike every other brand we have discussed today, this company built its entire business around one surprisingly simple idea: keep the supply chain as short, as transparent, and as accountable as possible. Our second recommendation is American Tuna. In many ways, this company takes the opposite approach from the massive global seafood corporations we discussed earlier. Instead of relying on an enormous international supply chain, American Tuna keeps its operations much closer to home. The company sources albacore tuna caught off the Pacific coast of the United States by American fishing families, then processes and packages that fish under domestic oversight. That shorter supply chain matters. Every additional transfer between fishing vessels, processing plants, distributors, and exporters creates another opportunity for mistakes, inconsistencies, or gaps in documentation. American Tuna was built to minimize those risks. The company provides clear information about where its fish comes from and places a strong emphasis on traceability from the ocean to the final product. That level of transparency is exactly what many consumers have been asking for throughout this investigation. Another important difference is ownership. American Tuna has remained family-owned rather than becoming part of a massive multinational food corporation. That does not automatically make the product better. But it does create a different level of accountability. When the reputation of a family business depends on every can that reaches consumers, maintaining trust becomes a long-term investment rather than simply another quarterly business objective. Independent testing has also supported the company's efforts to verify species identity and monitor mercury levels within recommended safety ranges. The ingredient list remains refreshingly simple. No unnecessary additives. No complicated formulations. Just straightforward canned tuna, prepared with transparency in mind. One thing to keep in mind is availability. American Tuna is not stocked in every grocery store across the country. Depending on where you live, you may need to order it online or visit specialty retailers. It also tends to cost more than many mainstream brands. But just as we discussed with Wild Planet, that additional cost helps support a shorter, more transparent supply chain, rather than simply paying for a recognizable label. And that brings us to the biggest lesson from today's investigation. Buying canned tuna should not feel like taking a guess. Consumers deserve to know exactly what species they are purchasing. They deserve to know where it was caught, how it was processed, whether independent testing has verified what appears on the label, and whether the company has earned their trust through transparency instead of clever marketing. Not every brand on today's list should automatically be avoided forever. Many companies have made improvements over the years. Some have strengthened oversight. Others have invested more heavily in responsible sourcing. But informed consumers should never stop asking questions. The more transparent a company is willing to be, the easier it becomes to trust what is inside the can. So the next time you are standing in the tuna aisle, do not focus only on the picture on the front of the package. Turn the can over. Read the label. Look for meaningful sourcing information. Check the nutrition facts. And choose the product that provides the greatest confidence, not simply the lowest price or the most familiar name. Surprised you the most today? Which brand do you trust after watching this investigation? And which food company should Golden Menu investigate next? Leave your answers in the comments because your suggestions help shape future videos. If you found this investigation helpful, subscribe to Golden Menu and share this video with someone who keeps canned tuna in their pantry. There is a good chance they have never heard many of these stories before. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next Golden Menu investigation.